나는 기워 땡기에 람예림바 람 냠슬레게 람들비게 탑세리 소리들 자사다 기워 땡기 람고 메기 냠슬레기 땡기 가르치고 그래서나.
Good evening. Last week we concluded looking at the trainings we neared the conclusion of the trainings shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. And in our final session last weekend, we looked at, top page 180, the kind of life through which cyclic existence is averted, which, to express it differently, what is the ideal basis upon which one can transform one's mind so as to gain liberation from cyclic existence. That ideal basis is a precious human rebirth. And what makes a human rebirth precious? It's that it's one that is marked by the 18 good qualities, the qualities of freedoms and endowments. This is what makes a human rebirth precious. Because with this basis, one can radically transform one's mind, abandon afflictions together with their seeds, and attain liberation. However, when one recognizes just the great value of what one has achieved, the second part of the reflection is to look at its impermanence, to recognize that what we've achieved has not only great potential, but it's finite. And when this opportunity will come to an end is unknown. It could come at any time. So the reflection on the impermanence of the precious human rebirth is the second point. And the third point we looked at was, whilst one can have a precious human rebirth as an ordained or non-ordained person, and as either an ordained or non-ordained person, one can strive to radically transform one's mind and progress towards attainment of liberation. Between the two, that of the opportunities that are presented to an ordained person, as opposed to those presented to a non-ordained person, the opportunities are presented to an ordained person are superior in the sense of making it easier to cultivate the qualities required to gain liberation from cyclic existence. So tonight, we're going to start at the very top of page 181, the kind of path to cultivate to avert cyclic existence. So we've just looked at the kind of life by which one can gain freedom from cyclic existence. Now we look at how to make the most of this life. So the first, there are three sections here in what remains of the text. Firstly, one recognizes or comes to understand the path to be cultivated, namely, and then one looks then very briefly at the three higher trainings. Of the three higher trainings, then thirdly, one looks at one of them in particular, the higher training in ethics. So we're concluding the trainings, the presentation on the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. So as we've seen, the focus of these trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity is to develop the mind of definite emergence. The mind of definite emergence is cultivated by firstly reflecting deeply on the faults of cyclic existence. This, or to express it differently, the sufferings of samsara, true sufferings. Thereafter, one looks at the causes of one's predicament, that namely contaminated karma and afflictions. This is the method by which one gives rise to the mind of definite emergence, the determined attitude to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara. And it has been mentioned how one needs to then train so as to fulfill this determined attitude. And that is to train in the 6 practices, namely generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. Now, turning to the text, we have a quotation from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend where he presents what the kind of path is that one needs to cultivate to avert cyclic existence. So I needed to change the second and third line in the first verse, so I'll read it a couple of times. Even if your head or clothes suddenly caught fire, you should still set aside putting it out. Please, henceforth, strive to put an end to your samsara. There is no purpose better than that. through pure ethics, wisdom, and concentration, attain nirvana, the peaceful, immaculate, tame state, which is ageless, deathless, and inexhaustible, free from earth, fire, water, wind, sun, and moon. So I'll read the first one again, because that's where most of the changes were. Even if your head or clothes suddenly caught fire, you should still set aside putting it out. Please henceforth strive to put an end to your samsara. There is no purpose better than that. In the first verse, looking at the first 3 lines, even if your head or clothes suddenly caught fire. So this presents a situation where if one imagines one's head and clothes being engulfed in fire, it's easy to understand what one's response would be. Spontaneously, without any intentional thought, a strong feeling or response, an urgency would arise to quell that fire. So this is the meaning then of the first line. So one imagines being in this situation, even if your head or clothes suddenly caught fire. In the second or third, you should still set aside putting it out. So this then means that even in a situation of urgency like that, one needs to have trained to the point where one is still aware of the need to abandon the afflictions first and foremost, not to be overwhelmed by the afflictions. The third line, please henceforth strive to put an end to your samsara. This needs to be one's priority. Whatever the circumstance one is engaging in, we need to be sure that the attainment of liberation is at the forefront of our mind, the forefront of our motivation. So no one would dispute that if one's head or clothes suddenly caught fire, that would be an absolutely terrible suffering experience. But here we are being guided to see even such a suffering experience in its broader perspective. When one thinks across the innumerable lifespans that we have already lived and how many still lie before us, even such horrendous suffering experience is the briefest of flashes. From that perspective, we see how minor even such a terrible suffering experience is. Whereas, keeping our mind focused on what is really important, this should always be our priority. So one may well hear this and think, this is a bit of an extremist point of view. If someone catches fire, they're not even supposed to be putting it out. This seems a bit much. How they're supposed to practice the Dharma if they're engulfed in flames? Of course, if one were to find oneself in such a predicament, of course one should put out the flames, because if one didn't, one's life would end. One would not be able to practice the Dharma. So obviously, if this were to actually happen, one should immediately address one's dire situation. Reading the first 3 lines again. Even if your head or clothes suddenly caught fire, you should still set aside putting it out. Please henceforth strive to put an end to your own samsara. So what this is not saying is that if you were actually in such a predicament that you were to catch fire, that you should not put it out. I mean, that would be ludicrous. Of course you should put it out. Rather, this is an illustration that we can use in our meditation to remind us of when we look at this one life across the expanse, the inconceivable spans of lifetimes that we have already lived and lie before us, this one life is fleeting and is insignificant. And certainly one experience, a suffering experience within that lifetime, is particularly insignificant. Yet we value our body so, we protect our body so, we look at all the care we take of our body and our reaction to any physical discomfort. So looking at the way that we value our body so in the perspective of lifetimes, we come to see this approach is not balanced.
Naturally.
What we need to address throughout the trainings of this chapter is to develop a more balanced approach. And this is then expressed or experienced through the adjusting of our priorities, what we see as of primary importance. And that then is the meaning of the second and third line, that even when one is experiencing grave problems, one should respond or deal with those problems in a non-afflicted way. We should deal with the problems and challenges in our life in a way that it does not create obstacles to our attainment of liberation, but is helpful for our attainment of liberation. So, at the forefront of our mind, no matter what we are experiencing, we need to ensure that we aren't acting in an afflicted way. When we're looking after ourselves, even in grave pain or grave danger, we need to be on guard first and foremost against the afflictions. Nothing is more important than that. And that then is the meaning of the fourth line. There is no purpose better than that. There is no purpose better than striving for liberation from cyclic existence. The third line in the verse, please henceforth strive to put an end to your samsara. So what Nakajin is advising is that no matter what we are experiencing, we need to respond to it in a way that is concordant or in harmony with this determined attitude of definite emergence to gain liberation from samsara. And what does this mean? It's gaining liberation from the causes that keep us bound in samsara, contaminated karma and afflictions. Because it's through contaminated karma and afflictions that we create our samsara. So therefore, it's through their abandonment that we gain liberation. And gaining liberation, there is no purpose better than that. Or striving to gain liberation, there's no purpose better than that. Now moving to the next verse. How to gain liberation. So the first line, through pure ethics, wisdom, and concentration. That was referencing the third line again in this verse. Please henceforth strive to put an end to your samsara. So there's the word strive. So what is it that one must strive in to put an end to one's samsara? This is what we see in the first line here of the next verse. Through pure ethics, wisdom, and concentration. So the usual order is that of ethics, concentration, and wisdom, but it's written in a different order here. So the translation is correct, but the order that one trains in is that of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So these are the three trainings to train in order to put an end to one's samsara. Another way, the way that we're more used to seeing these three expressed, is that of ethics, and then not explicitly mentioned would be also those of generosity, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, and then concentration and wisdom. So those six practices are what one usually hears, but they can be subsumed into these three. So looking now at the second verse, through pure ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So in that order, you'll recognize it as being the three higher trainings, the higher training in ethics, the higher training in concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. And these we are the more commonly expressed as the six practices, those of generosity, ethics, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. And it's through training in these, the three or the six, that one, now the second line, attains nirvana. Nirvana is the state of having abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds. And one does so by training in ethics, concentration, and wisdom, or expressed differently, generosity, ethics, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. And through that method, one achieves nirvana. Nirvana is the state where the mind has abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds. The nirvana, the last word in this line, state, is the state where one has abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds by means of the method in the first line. And the quality of the mind that has attained nirvana, that has attained the state of nirvana, is peaceful and immaculate. So immaculate is usually translated as undefiled. And then the last, tamed. So tamed is correct, or subdued. So the mind is tamed or subdued. It is undefiled or stainless also, and peaceful. So the mind that has attained nirvana has those qualities. Continue with the second verse, with the second and third line. So one attains the state of nirvana, then the state of nirvana is not a place, it's a mental state in that the mind has abandoned completely afflictions together with their seeds. And that mind has the qualities of being peaceful, undefiled, and tamed or subdued. Moreover, one has the qualities of being ageless, deathless, and limitless is okay, but it's normally translated as inexhaustible. So when a practitioner has attained nirvana, they have attained the cessation that comes with having abandoned afflictions together with their seeds. So in the life that the practitioner becomes an arhat, a foe destroyer, in that life, the body that they become an arhat in came about independent on contaminated karma and afflictions, because they were not an arhat when they were born. They abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds in that life, but when they were born due to karma and afflictions. So they still have contaminated aggregates when they become an arhat. When they die and are reborn, now, because they have abandoned afflictions together with their seeds, they are not born under the power of karma and afflictions. Why? The afflictions have been abandoned. So they are reborn under the power of their virtue. And therefore, they attain a mental body, or a body in the nature of mind. It's usually translated as mental body. Literally, it's a body in the nature of mind. So this is for an arhat, a foe destroyer. In the life that they become an arhat, when they abandon the afflictions together with their seeds completely, they have attained nirvana, but their body is still came about in dependence on contaminated karma. When they die and are reborn, they are no longer reborn under the power of contaminated karma and afflictions, because they have abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds. Now they are rather reborn under the power of their virtue, their virtuous karma. And therefore, their body is not contaminated, but a mental body. And for this reason, their being who attains the second line, the state of nirvana, now the third line, has a quality of ageless, deathless, and inexhaustible. So what ageless and deathless refers to is that this being will never again to be reborn under the power of contaminated karma and afflictions, because they've attained nirvana. They'll be reborn only under the power of virtue. So therefore, they will never experience the suffering of birth again, because they've abandoned afflictions, and they're not taking rebirth under the power of the afflictions. So they'll never experience the suffering of birth. Never experiencing again the suffering of birth, they won't experience the suffering of aging or sickness. So that's the meaning here of ageless. That's the, you remember in the Eightfold presentation of suffering, sufferings of birth, suffering of aging, suffering of sickness. And then deathless means they will never die again under the power of contaminated karma and afflictions, because they are liberated. So that is the meaning then of these terms, ageless and deathless, which describes a being who has attained nirvana. Moreover, now the term limitless, or more commonly translated as inexhaustible, what is inexhaustible is their virtue. Their virtue will never degenerate, because they've abandoned afflictions together with their seeds. The fourth line also relates to what we saw in the second, the state of nirvana. So being who has attained the state of nirvana is also free from earth, fire, water, wind, sun, and moon. So being who has not attained nirvana, their body is comprised of the coarse elements, those of earth, fire, water, and wind, or wind energy. A being who has attained nirvana, and as I mentioned earlier, when they die, then reborn under the power of their their virtuous karma, they attain a mental body. So therefore, they are not dependent on the coarse elements of earth, fire, water, and wind energy. Moreover, as ordinary beings, or beings who have not attained nirvana, are also dependent. Our bodies are also dependent on the sun and moon, for example, for heat for heat of the sun. So we have a dependency in this world on the sun and the moon. But a being who has attained liberation, who has attained nirvana, is not dependent on such things. So our bodies are comprised of these coarse elements of earth, fire, water, and wind energy. And our bodies have come about in dependence from contaminated karma and affliction. So therefore, these elements that comprise our body have also come about in dependence on contaminated karma. For an arhat, when they die and are reborn with a mental body, if we ask, is their mental body free of these elements of earth, fire, water, wind energy? The answer is no. The body is comprised also of these elements, but where the difference is, because our body has come about in dependence on karma that is contaminated by the afflictions, our body is impure. Whereas the body of an arhat, a fur destroyer, has come about in dependence on uncontaminated karma. Therefore, their body is pure, meaning their elements have not come from contaminated causes, but uncontaminated causes. Their elements are pure. To summarize this within the broader context of the trainings that are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. So what is the goal of a practitioner of intermediate capacity? So this is, we usually express as liberation. Here we use the term nirvana. So it's nirvana or liberation. This is the goal. How is that goal developed within one's mind so that it is a goal that one is genuinely striving for, that as opposed to just a mere expression of words, is through cultivating the mind of definite emergence. And cultivating definite emergence, this determination to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara into the state of liberation or nirvana, cultivating that mind of definite emergence to the point where it is uncontrived. It doesn't need to be contrived. It is so, one is so habituated to it, it is ever present. So this is how one develops the genuine attitude of striving for nirvana or liberation. It's through cultivating uncontrived definite emergence. And then when one has generated uncontrived definite emergence, one actually then needs to do something so as to achieve one's goal. What must one do? Is engage in the 6 practices, or train one's mind in the 6 practices of generosity, ethics, patience, joys, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. Or, as we see here, presented in the usual presentation for a practitioner of intermediate capacity, the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Here, so this is now the method, because we see the headline here, or the outline rather, how to the path to cultivate. So the paths to cultivate to attain the goal of nirvana are the paths of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. When one achieves one's goal of nirvana, the mind that is the mind that has attained nirvana, or to express it differently, the mind that has attained liberation from the sufferings of samsara has the qualities of being peaceful, undefiled, and subdued or tamed. So peaceful means the mind is at peace. Its peace will never be disturbed because the afflictions, together the seeds, have been abandoned. Likewise, the mind is undefiled or immaculate. It's undefiled because there are no afflictions or their seeds to defile the mind. And the mind is tamed or subdued in that there are no afflictions or their seeds that will stir the mind up. So therefore, the mind is tamed or subdued. it has these three qualities. The state of nirvana, or the mind that has attained liberation, has those three qualities. Moreover, because the being who has attained liberation from samsara will never take rebirth again under the power of, or under the control of, contaminated karma and afflictions, they are free from the sufferings of birth, aging or ageless, being ageless, sickness, and deathless. So that's the meaning there. And then their virtue will never be, their virtue is inexhaustible, meaning because the afflictions together, their seeds have been abandoned, there is nothing that will degenerate their virtue or impede the cultivation of virtue. So this then is and then moreover we saw in the last line, the free from earth, water, wind energy, sun and moon. So these then are the qualities of the state of nirvana, the mind that is liberated from samsara, and that mind is attained by means of cultivating the paths of ethics, concentration, and wisdom, and that goal of nirvana is attained through generating uncontrived definite emergence. Then, under these two quotations, Lama Tsongkhapa writes, train in the three types of precious trainings of the path as set forth in this statement. And so what are these three precious trainings? So that we see in the first line of the second verse, the higher training of ethics, the higher training of concentration, the higher training in wisdom. So the state of liberation is the state of having abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds entirely. So when you hear about this term liberation, or when you hear this term liberation, it can refer to the state of Buddhahood. But in this context right now, let's use the term mere liberation. This then excludes the trainings of a bodhisattva, the paths of a bodhisattva, the goal of Buddhahood and attainment of Buddhahood. All of that would be excluded. It would be mere liberation. So could say individual liberation. So for individual liberation or mere liberation, there are 7 causes that are required. The first, which has its own sub-causes, is what we've looked at extensively in this chapter, and this is how to develop uncontrived definite emergence, the determined attitude to attain liberation, to abandon afflictions together with their seeds. So that's the first cause, which again has its own sub-causes. Built upon that, one engages in the 6 practices, which can be presented just as 3, that of ethics, concentration, and wisdom, or in a more expansive way, that of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. So those 6, plus the foundational cause of uncontrived definite emergence, makes 7 paths that need to be cultivated within. These are the causes for liberation, for individual liberation. If any of these causes are missing, liberation will not be attained. One cannot attain liberation without wisdom. One cannot attain liberation without concentration. One cannot attain liberation without ethics. One cannot attain liberation without definite emergence. So these then are the causes that are required so as to attain liberation from samsara, to abandon the afflictions together with their seeds entirely. So about 3 years ago, we started looking at the trainings shared with a practitioner of initial capacity. And now this year, we've looked at the trainings which are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. So when we started looking at the trainings of a practitioner of initial capacity, there we looked at the sufferings of the lower realms. Then later, there are several chapters in between, later we came to the sufferings of the higher realms. Putting these together, the sufferings of the 3 lower realms, the sufferings of the 3 higher realms, also there were the presentations of sufferings, the 3-fold division of suffering, 6-fold division, and 8-fold division of suffering. All of these together reflecting on all of these together, one comes to see that samsara is pervaded by suffering. By reflecting on each of those points well, repeatedly over a sustained period, we come to recognize that there is nothing in samsara that has any abiding value. In other words, there's no state in samsara say, oh, I wish I had this, I wish I had that, then life would be better. There's no such thing to long for. Thereafter, we looked at why we are in samsara. What is the origin or the cause of our samsaric existence? So this is then true origins. And that there we saw contaminated karma, and in particular afflictions, the afflictions being primary. So this was the cultivation of the two causes that lead to the generation of uncontrived definite emergence. It's first reflecting on true sufferings by looking at how all the realms of samsara, the lower realms, the higher realms, as well as the other presentations on suffering, the 3, 6, and 8, by that means looking at true sufferings, seeing there's nothing in samsara that is not free of suffering. Nothing that is bound in samsara that is not in the nature of suffering. And why? Then the second cause, true origins, because everything that has come about in dependence on afflictions has come about from contaminated karma. Therefore, it is naturally subject to suffering. We come thereby to recognize there is no abiding value in samsara, and we develop this determined attitude to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara, definite emergence, or usually translated as renunciation. So we develop this mind of definite emergence, meditating on it repeatedly over a sustained period, so that definite emergence becomes uncontrived. Doesn't need to be intentionally generated in meditation, so contrived, but it naturally, spontaneously arises. That then is of the seven causes for the attainment of liberation, is the primary cause, that the generation of uncontrived definite emergence. It is the main cause. With this cultivated, then when one engages in the 6 practices of generosity, ethical restraint, and so forth, because of the power of the motivation of uncontrived definite emergence, those practices will lead to powerful causes that will lead to the eventual abandonment of the afflictions together with their seeds and the attainment of liberation. So I want to emphasize again the importance of definite emergence and how to cultivate it. It is difficult to do, but once definite emergence is cultivated, everything else comes quickly. So to cultivate definite emergence, we saw an analogy in the first verse tonight about what it is like to have a mind of definite emergence, where one's mind is focused that in whatever one encounters, one isn't distracted from what is important. With a mind that is of uncontrived definite emergence, this life's problems, this life's attractions or pleasures do not distract one. They are seen in their true value, and one can let go of them with ease. Therefore, with the mind of definite emergence cultivated, one is very focused on what has value, on what matters. Therefore, the cultivation of all the qualities of the paths comes about easily. So this is why definite emergence is so important. Now, to recap the steps to cultivate it. Here we go further back. So you could say the preliminaries for definite emergence are the trainings shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, where one reflects on precious human rebirth. And we saw that on the previous page, the kind of life through which cyclic existence is averted. One comes to recognize the great value of this opportunity. When one has recognized this, every day is a blessing. Every day is an opportunity. And then when you join that with understanding of impermanence, you know, now is the time. I need to embrace this opportunity right now. And then with that determined attitude, one can reflect continuously on the sufferings of samsara, the first direct cause to generate definite emergence, the sufferings of samsara or true sufferings. And this is presented in, you could say, two ways, the general and specific sufferings. So the specific sufferings of the various realms of samsara, the lower realms and the higher realms. That's the specific sufferings. And then there's the general sufferings, the threefold, sixfold, eightfold presentation. Reflecting well on all of that, one is able to reflect well on all of that by having recognized the value of this life, but its impermanence. Therefore, there's a sense of urgency and focus. Then one reflects deeply on these various presentations on suffering and coming to recognize there is nothing in samsara that has any abiding value. There's no hoping for a better circumstance or for this problem to be overcome or for this little pleasure to be enjoyed. It's seen in its truer light. One is no longer distracted by these problems. This then is reinforced with the wisdom that comes with, or the intelligence that comes with, reflecting on the second key cause that leads to definite emergence. The first was true sufferings. The second is true origins, which is contaminated karma and afflictions. This then gives one the knowledge that not only is there nothing of abiding value in samsara, to gain freedom is possible by eradicating the causes. And the primary cause, the principal cause, is the afflictions. This is what I need to abandon. Nothing else matters. Then we want, as reflected well on true origins, true sufferings and true origins, the mind of definite emergence comes, the determined attitude to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara. When you meditate on this repeatedly, so that it becomes uncontrived, one's mind is determined and focused. Nothing matters but abandoning the afflictions. One will put out the fires on one's head, but one will not do so under the influence of afflictions. Such is the power of one's determination. So this is difficult to achieve, definite emergence. But again, when one does, everything else goes quickly. You've heard over the years me say many times that the meaning of meditation is habituation or familiarization. It's the synonyms. The same word can be translated in these ways. And it's through reflecting on the same thing again and again that we start to change our way of thinking. With that understanding, hopefully you understand why when I teach, I move through a topic very slowly and I repeat the key points over the weeks and the months and the years again and again. Because by hearing even what you've heard many times before, by hearing it again, it sinks deeper. And in particular, if you are able to enhance that by your own reflections, it will start to transform your way of thinking, transform what you value. That being said, now I'm going to repeat what I've just been saying. So what is liberation? This word liberation, it refers to being liberated from suffering. Liberated from suffering or liberated from samsara. What to talk about then, the state of liberation, that is a state where the afflictions together with their seeds have been abandoned. So how to achieve, so why is it that liberation why is it that one is liberated from samsara or liberated from the sufferings of samsara when the afflictions together with their seeds have been abandoned? It is because the origins of our suffering are the afflictions. When the afflictions are abandoned, one is liberated from suffering. One is liberated from samsara. So the afflictions are the cause of our suffering. It's the afflictions that create our samsara because they create the contaminated karma. This is why liberation is a state where the afflictions together with their seeds have been abandoned. And why the seeds? That means the afflictions can never ripen again. one is permanently liberated from suffering, permanently liberated from samsara. One's mind is peaceful, undefiled, and tamed. How to achieve the state of liberation, or to express it differently, how to abandon afflictions together with their seeds. So this is the method or the technique comprises cultivating 7 causes or 7 paths. Those are, firstly, and most importantly, uncontrived definite emergence. And then secondly, the 6 practices of generosity to wisdom. How to cultivate uncontrived definite emergence. That has its 2 causes or subparts here. So the first is reflecting on true sufferings, and the second is true origins. True sufferings we reflect on by way of reflecting on the general, the specific sufferings of samsara, so the specific sufferings of each realm, of each individual lower realm, each individual higher realm. The second way to reflect on true sufferings is the general presentations, or the specific and the general presentations of suffering, the 3, the 6, and the 8. Reflecting on true sufferings, one comes to recognize that there is nothing in samsara that has any abiding value. Every pleasure is transient, and every pleasure just deceives. It draws us towards it, as if its attainment has any value, when in reality it does not. Then the second cause of definite emergence is true origins, where you recognize the very origin of all our suffering, or the very cause of all our suffering, is our karma. This karma which is contaminated by the role that the afflictions play, both in the cultivation of that karma as well as in its ripening. So when one is reflecting on both of these causes of definite emergence, true sufferings and true origins, it leads us to the wish for liberation. So both causes are required. The first, reflecting on true sufferings, we need to recognize what suffering, how pervasive suffering is in samsara. And then true origins is to recognize why we are in this predicament. And when we recognize the why, and we truly recognize it, not just intellectually understand it, that it is these afflictions, then we develop this determined attitude to abandon those afflictions, knowing that it's by abandoning the afflictions together with their seeds that we gain liberation. So therefore, the mind of definite emergence comes about when one recognizes the causes of suffering. One will only truly recognize, or in a transformative manner recognize the cause of suffering, when one has recognized just how pervasive suffering is. And then, when this mind of definite emergence has arisen, one's focus on all that one is doing, even putting out the flames of one's body, will be on, I must not come under the influence of the afflictions. Nothing is more important than that. And with that being said, one will certainly not be drawn to the delights of this life or overcoming the insignificant problems of this life. This word, liberation, it's a small word. In Tibetan, it's really short. So it is a small word. Its causes, only 7, not a particularly large number. That being said, there's a lot to understand in terms of what is meant by liberation and how to cultivate those causes. That being said, there's so much that to be done in terms of habituating our mind to this way of thinking. And where one's focus really needs to be is on definite emergence, which is cultivated by means of true sufferings and true origins. Those are the 2 causes for definite emergence. So there's 7 causes for liberation. The first cause is definite emergence, which has its own 2 causes. And as mentioned, to the extent that one develops definite emergence, one's mind becomes ever less distracted by the trivialities of this life. This life is seen as truly precious But the comings and going of this life, this is seen as unimportant, as transitory, and having no real value. One is thereby no longer drawn into the attainment of this pleasure or the repelling of that problem. One sees them in their true light. This is why the mind of definite emergence is such a powerful mind. It's a mind that's focused on what has value, the cultivation of the Dharma within. And to bring this all together, these trainings that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, the foundation to develop the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, is relying on a spiritual teacher. A teacher to guide one in this presentation, to guide one in how to cultivate these qualities within one's mind. And a spiritual teacher who can keep giving one the encouragement that this is entirely possible for all of us. It is not beyond the capacity of any of us. And there we can conclude for tonight and then continue tomorrow. And thank you very much. But I see the questions, so we can start with Cameron.
Yeah, just a question on phrasing. I'm sorry, what? Just a question on phrasing.
Phrasing.
Phrasing. You were saying definite emergence becomes uncontrived. So you said that a couple of times. I thought that sounded bad. I thought it seemed like a tautology. So I thought definite emergence was actually uncontrolled. So is that tautological or not?
Explain tautological to me.
Meaning repetition of the same meaning within the phrase.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Then, okay. When one goes through these meditations as presented, and the mind of definite emergence arises, then definite emergence has been generated. That is contrived, because it's been intentionally generated. It will pass, and will need to be generated again and again. Through that repetition, it will become eventually, one will be so habituated to it, it will be uncontrived. So this word contrived can be, in other contexts, translated as created or manufactured. So it doesn't need to be manufactured again, because it's almost ever present. So some people call it spontaneous, but I don't really like spontaneous. That needs something to generate it. But when it becomes uncontrived, one doesn't need to make any effort. It just comes. It's like when you were learning to drive. It was a lot of effort, in particular if you were in a manual back then, trying to make everything work together. Your concentration was all over the show. Then after a long time, you're able to drive without thinking. You could be lost on whatever's playing on the radio or in conversation with the person next to you, and your hands and feet just did everything. That's uncontrived. But before that, you're driving, and your driving instructor was very, very impressed with you, but it was very contrived. Yeah.
So we could meaningfully talk about a contrived death.
Yes. So, yes, absolutely. And so when one is meditating in the way presented, one does this meditation, and eventually some form of definite emergence arises, but it fades quickly. And that will continue for a long time. But if one's really continuing with these meditations, the fading will not be as quick. It will last a little longer. And on the other end, the arisal will come more quickly. This is where you're seeing the habituation come. But in the end, it's you always needing to sit there and generate it. So it's contrived. And it doesn't last, it fades. Eventually, it becomes uncontrived. In this period between going from contrived to uncontrived, there are many stages of development. And as I've just tried to express, it starts to come ever more easily and fade ever more slowly. So these are the various stages of becoming ever more uncontrived, but it's not yet uncontrived. Or the contriving comes ever more easily.
Quite.
David?
The seed of the affliction, I believe that are the three poisons, or That's a question.
Are the seeds or the afflictions the three poisons? Yeah. So afflictions together with their seeds. So two different but related things. So the afflictions are presented as six principal ones. What's called six main afflictions. So afflictions are root and secondary, 6 and 20. So usually presented like that. And then this would be presented as of those 6 and 20, the root and the secondary, there are three main ones, the three poisons, that of ignorance, of attachment, and anger. So we're just talking about afflictions here. Those are the three main afflictions. They're called the three poisons. So there's 6 main ones, 20 secondary, 26. But there are three main ones, three root ones, which of those 6, there are 3 which are root afflictions. And of those 3 poisons, the 3 root ones, it's really ignorance, which is the main one. These are all afflictions. These need to be abandoned, as well as their seeds. So afflictions are consciousness. Seeds aren't consciousness. To impermanent phenomena are of 3 types: consciousness, matter or form, and other. The term for other is non-associated compounded phenomena. Other is a lot easier. So seeds are other. They're not consciousness and they're not matter. They're other. Okay. But the seeds, what is their function? The seeds have the capacity to generate consciousness. When a seed of an affliction ripens, an affliction which is consciousness ripens. That's the function of the seeds. Just like a seed of barley has the capacity. So the seeds can be called potent seeds as well, because they have the potential to bring about consciousness. Just like the seed has the potential to bring about barley. Likewise, the seed of an affliction have the capacity or potential, same word, capacity or potential to bring about that affliction. So a seed of anger will ripen into the consciousness of anger. So that's seeds or afflictions and seeds. How are seeds created? When an affliction arises, a seed is placed on the continuum. So and how does the next affliction come about? Well, because you've got the seeds for it, meets the ripening condition, and there it is. So therefore, merely suppressing the afflictions is insufficient. One needs to abandon the seeds. Then they never come again. Then one has liberation. So when our mind is nice and relaxed, we tend to be our mind's broad and spacious, and we don't get annoyed or frustrated so easily. And perhaps then we can engage in meditation at a time like that on love and compassion. And because our mind is relaxed and spacious, we'll really be able to generate it. And then we can go out and we can be amongst with others with minds of love and compassion dominant within us.
Sure.
But whilst we are experiencing no manifest anger, for example, because we have the seeds on our continuum, as soon as we meet the right or the correct ripening condition, the affliction of anger will ripen. Why? Because we've got the seeds on our continuum. It's met the ripening condition, the person we dislike, and that lovely spacious mind, that loving mind is gone. Now we are angry. And whilst we're angry, no love and compassion manifest in our mind. But the seeds are still there for love and compassion. And we added to those seeds earlier when we were meditating on love and compassion. And now when we've got angry, we've created more seeds for anger too. So this is the process. So let's end there because it's already quite late.